Love this podcast? Support it and sponsor today. Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
How often is it now that you go to a restaurant and everybody at your table seems to have food intolerances? Do you have one? Now, is this the latest craze, or is it real? Or is it just the fact we're fussier these days about the foods we eat, and we choose not to eat some foods that we're really not intolerant to? How tough is this for the food industry? No longer do we order something straight off the menu. Many orders are tailored to people's food intolerances or dietary requirements. I was talking to a friend who waitresses, and she spoke of the enormous stress on staff these days. If you have a table of 60 people, every second person has a food intolerance. It seems to be everywhere. Have you noticed it yourself? Let's look at the difference between allergies and food intolerances. Now, an intolerance is very different to a food allergy. Food allergies are when the body mounts an immune response to a food, whether it's either ingested or even if it touches the skin. Now, this immune response is very quick, within 2 minutes to 2 hours, and it releases chemicals that affect the following: the person's breathing, their gastrointestinal tract, and their heart. Common foods that cause allergies include eggs, wheat, peanuts, and shellfish. Usually, most reactions are mild to moderate and can be treated with antihistamines. However, some can be life-threatening and require emergency treatment. The most severe systemic allergic reaction is anaphylaxis. Many years ago, when I was pregnant with our second child, I had a craving for lollipops that are called chupa chups here in Australia. They're all different flavours, but at the time my craving was for vanilla. So each night after dinner, that's what we'd have for dessert. Poor Paul, no apple pie and ice cream for him. Once I was unable to find my usual vanilla lollipops at the shop, so I bought a chopped banana flavour. That evening, Paul was sitting in his chair after dinner, enjoying his chopped banana flavoured lollipop, when suddenly he said to me, I can't breathe very well. Now, we had some Ventolin, an asthma medication that was my son's, so I gave it to him with an antihistamine. But nothing seemed to work. After another 20 minutes, he said, look, honestly, I can't breathe. So I called my mum to babysit and we headed off to the hospital. When we got there, his oxygen levels were dangerously low. He was given an EpiPen and put on oxygen, and his levels were monitored for more than 12 hours until they were back to normal. Now, all the doctors could think is that it was actually the food colouring in the lollipop that had created an allergic reaction. Now, many jokes were made, but guess what? We don't eat banana chocolate lollipops anymore. In fact, we don't even bother with any lollipops. Apple pie and ice cream are back on the menu. Now, this is an example of an anaphylactic allergic reaction. The mechanisms behind food intolerances vary greatly, but some of the most common food intolerances are due to lack of enzymes. Some people lack an enzyme called lactase, which is used to break down the carbohydrates found in milk and dairy products. This can result in abdominal bloating, pain, and discomfort. Other food intolerances are due to lack of enzymes, are histamines and caffeine. Red wine, strong cheeses, tuna, tomatoes, and pork products can produce symptoms such as itchiness of the skin, abdominal pain, nausea, dizziness, headaches, and migraines. Now, food intolerances don't kill you, but they can cause a variety of problems. My husband and my son both have many intolerances to different foods. And if you're thinking right now, poor Kate, I agree with you. It makes cooking a nightmare, and I can't buy anything off the shelf. Foods such as soy sauces, vinegars, wines, beer, chocolate, and cheeses give them massive migraines. Now remember, intolerances are not going to kill you, but they can make you feel very unwell. I'm Kate Mason, and welcome to Parenting and Personalities. This is the podcast that connects you to the ones you care about the most. Today's discussion is about food intolerances as opposed to allergic reactions. These things can happen to us no matter what personality type we are. Dr Evangeline Mantzioris is the Program Director of the Nutrition and Food Sciences degree. She is an accredited practicing dietitian and sports dietitian with experience in clinical dietetics and clinical teaching. In 2021, she was appointed to the NHMRC, Australian Dietary Guidelines Expert Review Committee. Evangeline is passionate about communicating nutritional science to the public. She's an invited talker and media communicator for radio, television and print. She's an author and editor and writer for The Conversation. Hi Evangeline, welcome to the show.
Hi, lovely to be here.
Now, looking at your resume of what you've done with your life, was nutrition always going to be your career of choice? Where did it start, the desire to look at nutrition?
Absolutely. I remember when I was a young teenager, probably about 13 or 14, looking through the SATAC guide, trying to decide, where I wanted my future career to be. And I saw that they talked about dietitians, and I thought this was really amazing as it combined how to improve your health through food. And given my background was Greek and food is always such a large part of Greek culture and life, I thought this was amazing that you could choose a career in dietetics. And that was back in the 1980s where there weren't so many dietitians and nutritionists around, and it wasn't something that people knew about. So I was pretty set from then to have my career in nutrition and dietetics.
Has a lot changed over the years?
Yeah, that's an interesting question because at one level, nothing has changed, but at another level, everything has changed. So from the perspective that nothing has changed, if we look at the dietary recommendations back in the early 90s when I started studying nutrition, basically they look very similar to what we have today. But what has changed is the evidence behind it. And by the evidence, I mean the science, the research, the experiments that people have done to look at these recommendations. And what it's done is really, solidified the importance of diet, the importance of eating unprocessed foods, your fruit, vegetables, breads and cereals, a little bit of meat. And it's given us the understanding about why they're so important in our diet. And every new thing that's found out just adds to that evidence base that, yes, this is what our diet should look like. So, for example, the microbiome is such a recent discovery about how bacteria can affect our health and how we feel. And to have a good microbiome in your body, basically you need to consume foods that have lots of fibre. So it gives us an understanding about the recommendation to have lots of fruits and vegetables and grains and cereals, because without fibre in our diet, the microbiome can't live, and the healthy microbiome. And when we eat a lot of processed food, your typical Western diet, if you like, high in processed foods, little fruit, vegetables, what it does is encourages the bad bacteria in our body to grow. And people think that a quick solution is eating fermented foods or having, little bottles of, bacteria, good bacteria to consume. But without fibre in your diet, they don't live because they live off the fibre. So that's what's changed. And I guess the other aspect that's changed is the social media and the availability of influencers to be able to make claims about food and supplements without any scientific evidence. And that's changed the arena a lot about how we deal with that.
Yeah, that is really interesting. It's very, very true. And in a way, the old days of diet was so much better for us with meat, 3 veg. It was so much easier and so many less choices to make. And I do love the fact that there's a lot of science involved in showing us what things are true and what things aren't. And I think that's really important. It's really important for those people who have scientific brains out there that sit there and go, well, show me the results. I really want to see this. Yeah. And the fact that we're actually investigating all of this type of thing. Now, today we're going to talk about the differences between allergic reactions and food intolerances. And so I was just wondering, can you just tell us in your words the differences between those to start with?
Absolutely. So a food allergy is when someone consumes something, or even if it touches their skin, and it creates an allergic reaction. And by allergic reaction, we mean the immune response is involved. And the immune response can be really quite quick. And we see this, I guess, one of the most common allergies that we're aware of in our society, particularly as parents, is peanut allergies in schools. And what happens is they consume it and there's an immediate swelling of the mouth and the respiratory tract, which can block, airflow in and can cause death. And that's the primary difference, is you get this quick anaphylactic immune reaction caused by the immune system, which can lead to death. So it's a really serious, concern for anyone that has an allergy, where they have to be really careful and they need to carry an EpiPen. So when they feel that, they can inject themselves with the EpiPen and stop that immune reaction. And intolerance can range across many things. So intolerance generally doesn't involve the immune system in that quick way. It could be that we don't have the enzymes to break down some of the things in food. It could mean we have a hypersensitivity to some foods. And the side effects are still bad and still concerning, but they generally won't kill you straight away.
Yes.
So normally we see gastrointestinal symptoms. It might be nausea or vomiting. It might be diarrhea. It might be cramps. It might be excessive wind. It might be stomach bloating. It could also be reactions that we see on the skin. So hives, itchiness, maybe a runny nose, things like that. And as you can see, that can be related to things outside of food. So hay fever season will cause some of those reactions as well. So it's really tricky to pick out what exactly is causing the food intolerance. Is it in fact your food? Is it something in the environment? Is it detergent, a new detergent that's been used on the clothes? It can be a whole range of things.
It really can. And so the thing is, with the allergic reaction, are hives or something like that, is that an allergic reaction if you've eaten food and you get hives or just a bit of throat swelling?
Yeah.
My son has a middle reaction somewhere in his esophagus that actually is allergic to certain stuff.
Yeah.
So if I was a parent and I was looking for would be allergic reaction in my child, could it be a rash as well as a shortness of breath?
It could be, and that's the tricky thing. It could start off as that, and the second exposure gets a lot worse. So if you're concerned, the best thing to do is go to the doctor and get it checked out.
Yeah.
Particularly if there's a family history. So if your children before have had similar problems, if the parents have problems, grandparents, aunties, uncles, whoever. And it's often might be difficult to determine, especially with kids. So always just go to the doctor and get it checked out. And even if it's an intolerance, and we talk about lactose intolerance is a quite common one, I'd still recommend that people go and get it checked out with their doctor, because it could be hiding another diagnosis which might be more sinister.
I was working with a parent who was worried about their kid because they didn't focus in class on the details and they were worried they were going to get low grades. And then this child was given a project, which was something he could run with, and his attitudes and grades went through the roof. He was in his element. Do you and your child need to find their point of difference so they can fly? Let me help you unravel some of the enigmas of their personality and enjoy parenting a kid that you actually understand. After all, parenting's supposed to be fun. Let's chat. thepersonalitycoach.com.au. You know how you talk about it becoming worse each time? My director of the podcast and myself have both witnessed. My son was anaphylactic to smoked salmon when he was 13. And when he was 18, we went back and rechecked, and he wasn't anymore. And a friend of Doug's was anaphylactic to chicken. Oh, no, sorry, it was to fish, and isn't anymore. So what happens with that allergy or anaphylactic reaction?
Yeah. We say they grow out of it. What that actually means physiologically or biochemically, we don't really understand. I guess it's good that happens, because that suddenly opens up a whole lot of other food choices and, reduces the risk of something happening. We don't know well enough what the problem, why it changes. But yes, it is good to keep getting it tested, particularly if it's a core food group. If it's something like caviar or, something weird that you don't have very often, it's probably not a major issue. But with those common foods, it is best to get it evaluated.
So if as a parent and as a person myself, if I have a food intolerance, what's your best way of recording? Do you suggest people follow food diaries? Because I know that a food intolerance can actually play up Not instantly. My husband will get a migraine instantly from his intolerances. So we know straight away, oh, that's in that food. However, a lot of food intolerances can be a couple of days later. It's not necessarily an instant reaction. It could be a delayed reaction. So what do you recommend people do to find that out?
Absolutely. It does make it tricky, doesn't it? Because you've consumed so many foods in that time. And the other thing that may play up is not that it's just a couple of days later, but the quantity of food that's consumed. So, for example, if I use lactose intolerance, and I'll just explain what that is a little bit. Lactose intolerance is that you can't break down a sugar called lactose. And when you can't break down the lactose, it means that this lactose unit isn't broken down into glucose, and so it isn't absorbed into our bloodstream. And so it stays in the intestines, and it just goes right through the intestine. And what it does is it draws water out from the intestines and the colon to reduce the concentration of it, causing the diarrhea that we see. Okay? But what we know is that some people may have, and the reason they can't break down this lactose, is because they don't have the enzyme called lactase, or they may not produce enough of it. So they may be okay drinking tea or coffee with milk in it, or even, if you have muesli and you have a little bit of milk. But if they have a milkshake, which is, big 600 mils, or a Farmers Union iced coffee, which is really popular here in Adelaide, that quantity will cause the problem. So the best thing to do is, if you suspect it, is to do a food diary. So if you're going, oh, look, this has happened a couple of times now, and I suspect it might be that, I'm just going to keep a record of what I eat. And if you suspect it's milk, maybe trial yourself with milk a few times and see what happens, and trial it in different quantities. There's also FODMAPs, which is the inability, it's grouped together the inability to break down a whole lot of different carbohydrates. And one of the common ones is onions. So if you eat onions, as a flavouring in a dish like a casserole or a soup or a curry, and there's one onion and it goes between 6 to 8 to 10 people, it won't affect you. But if you have a French onion soup where you have a couple of onions in your bowl, that will affect you. So using that food diary and putting down the quantities of food is also really important. So you might say, just list it as breakfast, wheat bix plus half a cup of milk, one piece of fruit, a coffee, black, morning tea, and just list it all.
Yes.
And then put down when your symptoms happened. So you probably have to do this for a couple of weeks, and I would recommend, throwing in those foods. And then once you've got a bit of an idea of what might be happening, that's when you take that to the doctor and say, look, I kept a diary for a few weeks. This is what I think might be happening. What can we do? And in the case of lactose intolerance, it's good to actually get that tested with what we call a breath hydrogen test, and then confirm, yes, it is.
Right.
And most people will still be okay having little bits of milk. And then yogurt and cheese is normally fine, because when milk is fermented to yogurt and cheese, the bacteria break down the lactose, so there's little lactose left in the cheese and yogurt.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, so particularly hard cheeses. So if people still react to the cheese and the yogurt, it may indicate that they have a cow's milk protein intolerance. So all this sort of stuff is important to gather and bring together.
It is, because it's very uncomfortable if you've got those symptoms. The other thing I thought was really interesting is when you're talking about wheat allergy. And, so many people are avoiding breads and going, oh, I've got a wheat allergy or whatever. And you've written in your article that sometimes it's actually not wheat.
Yeah.
It's actually something called is it
fructan?
Fructan.
Yeah,
yes. Yeah. So can you tell us what happens with that? Because I've got a husband that's he can have sourdough bread, but he can't have any other kind of bread.
Yeah. So fructan is one of the carbohydrate that's in wheat, and depending on how the bread is produced, it can affect the levels of fructan. So there's one particular bread that's on the market where they try to wash it out a little bit more and reduce the amount of those, types of carbohydrates that are in it. So once again, it could be that you have a wheat allergy. It could be that you just have FODMAPs. And then it depends on the amount that's consumed again. So once again, it is good to, try it out. The sourdough will have a few different types of nutrients in it because the bacteria ferment away, and they may ferment different carbohydrates over time. But remember, with sourdough, you don't have any live bacteria in it. They're all killed when they're baked in the oven. So
so it's not as if you're actually getting real bacteria.
And personally, I think the worst thing that would happen would be for you to assume you have a wheat allergy and then you totally drop out bread and pizza and pasta for the rest of your life. And that's one of the concerns if you diagnose yourself and make assumptions, is that you're getting rid of a food group that A, you may really love and enjoy, and B, that supplies really important nutrients for your health.
And obviously fibre as well in that sense too.
Absolutely. And I'd say fibre is really critical for reducing the risk of many diseases, but particularly bowel cancer. And bowel cancer is something that we're seeing a lot of, in Western countries. So you really don't want to drop your dietary fibre because you want that to reduce your risk of bowel cancer. It's one of the most preventable cancers in the world.
That's true. So the food changing over the years, like nowadays we have so much takeaway. We have so many things that we can go and buy that are immediate food things, and they're not necessarily healthy, and there's not a lot of fibre in them. So do you have a kind of a recommendation of a certain amount of fruit and veg still these days, that you would recommend, and a certain amount of food for fibre? Because obviously it sounds like fibre is actually a massive issue and that people really should be paying attention to it. And I know that it's really hard to fit all of that fibre in today.
It is. So if we look at the Australian Dietary Guidelines, which are a set of guidelines that have been developed from the evidence base, and the last ones were done in 2013, and they actually read and analysed 50,000 scientific articles to pull together that information about what we need to consume to reduce our risk of chronic diseases by about 50%. So that's quite significant. And what they decided on was to recommend 2 serves of fruit a day, and a serve of fruit is an apple or an orange or a banana. And for those fruits that are like grapes and melon, it's basically what you can comfortably fit in your hand. And then 5 serves of vegetable. And a serve of vegetable is either half a cup of cooked veggies or 1 cup of raw salad-style vegetables. What we know in Australia is our intake of vegetables are really low. So it's only about 8% of the population that consume their 5 serves of vegetables a day. So that's really, really low. In other countries around the world, they actually recommend higher intake of vegetables because there's further benefit to be gained by consuming more than 5 serves. So really 5 should be our bare minimum. And then the other important consideration is your breads and grains, and preferably having whole grain cereals and grains, because there's more vitamins and more minerals associated with the whole grain as well as the extra fibre. So a slice of whole grain bread compared to white bread will have about 2 to 3 times the amount of iron in it, and iron's another critical nutrient. We've lived in a world of food industry where everything is stripped away, refined it to make it more palatable, to make more sales, and that's just detrimental for our health. So Michael Pollan, not sure if you've heard of him, who's a food political writer, he said, don't eat something that your grandmother wouldn't recognise.
Very good. Yep.
Yeah, or shop from the outside of your supermarket. So, looking at the breads and cereals, the fruits and vegetables, the whole meat, and all the processed stuff is in the shelves in the middle, trying to avoid that.
That's a really good idea. And the other thing too is, I always say to my kids, if it's got more than 4 ingredients, then, it's probably not going to be a good thing for you in that sense either. Less ingredients is way better as well.
And particularly the ingredients that are additives, like it's not so much if it's a soup that's got lots of different veggies in it and beans and pasta. It's those other additive bits that are the problem. The thing I've always said is, when you look at some foods, things like cheesels or tubes, and you go, or twisties, you go, what is it? Yes. I don't actually recognise the original food it comes from. And, and uni students go to me, what do you mean, what's a twisty? It's a snack food. I'm like, yeah, but where did it come from?
Yes. Yeah, what did it originate from with all the flavourings and all of the and it sticks that yellow on your
That's right. Yeah.
So for anyone listening that's overseas, that is a very coloured yellow crunchy chip that we have over here. Oh, it's like a chip, but in Australia, and it's full of no goodness at all.
That's right. Yeah.
So really, That's fantastic. That's great advice. That's lovely hearing it from you. It's so experienced in your field too, and knowing and understanding. So really we need fibre, and we need lots of fruit and vegetables, and we need to be doing it as whole meal and as least processed as possible in order to keep our bowel healthy. Because like you say, if that's a disease we can prevent, then that's what we need to be doing.
That's right.
So that's cool.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for being on it here today. It's really enlightening, and it's been lovely to have you, Evangeline.
Thank you, Kate. It's been a pleasure.
So no matter whatever kind of personality you are, don't ever ignore rashes, shortness of breath after any food, sting, bite, or plant allergy. Seek help immediately and see a medical professional to provide you with a plan for possible future episodes. For food intolerances, keep a food diary to help follow which foods might cause the symptoms that you or your child might have, and always seek medical help if needed. I'm Kate Mason. Thank you for listening to Parenting and Personalities. If you've enjoyed this episode, we'd love it if you leave a rating and a review. That would help others learn about this podcast. If you're interested in discovering more about you and your family's personality types, you'll find my newly launched book, Who Is This Monster or Treasure in My House, on Booktopia or Amazon. If you have an episode idea, please send a note to thepersonalitycoach@gmail.com. Many thanks to our producers at Stories and Strategies, and we'll see you next time.
Love this podcast? Support it and sponsor today. Simply head to ACCSDnetwork.com for details.